All right. So The Plague by Albert Camus came out in there's a book here. Came out in 1947, and it's probably about 5 years after The Stranger, I think. And there's actually a couple different references to it. They like about shooting an Arab man, for example. One of the characters does that in The Plague. Originally, obviously, Le Peste. I think Le Peste in French. So it's set in this. At first, I thought it was a fictional city named Oran, I think. But I actually later found out, kind of embarrassingly long after I actually first read the novel, that the place is actually a real place in Algiers, on a coast, just like the narrator describes it as a coastal city. And there's this something is brewing, just really strange happening in this city, and these people are pretty lax. You know, they very. I don't know too much about Algiers, but I do know the author himself, Albert Camus, lived there. He was born and raised there, and he was a French / Algier, so he, Algerian. They're obviously, occupied. There's a great occupation of like kind of in a militaristic kind of fashion, kind of thing, coming in there and just kind of overtaking things. And I think Camus also had a lot to say, and a lot of like activism. That he felt strongly about, because of the fact that he cared very much for his mother too, like the fact that she might be harmed by some of these different disputes and brawls and fighting and all that happening in his home city, and he very much wanted there to be peace. But people were very on edge in that. And it seemed like so, especially during the 40s, like a lot of things on edge. So this is very much a novel kind of for the time, but it's also kind of fits perfectly as could just as easily encapsulate all of humanity. Like the fact that a plague could happen to us, just like it did. In fact, I think the reason this book came up so much during it actually had a boom in the pandemic because of, it's pretty obvious why. I mean, that people started having not only a lot more time to read and stuff, but like they also kind of questioned why something like that would happen, and kind of maybe more of the literary privy people keen on literature were pointing out like, hey, this reminds us of Camus' The Plague from the late 40s. Yeah. And it's pretty, I think it's, I've heard a lot of people say stuff like, oh, it reminds, the plague, or, I'm sorry, people have a lot of sayings or a lot of correlations to the pandemic that I think that people kind of see connections where they're not really all that many, but, I mean, but it's hard not to see this, like the way people react to, like they are, it's the amount of misinformation or the amount of, glib, indifference, I suppose, But anyway, so takes place in Oran, and it's a nice sunny city. I'd imagine, like I was trying to explain earlier, that I imagine like so many of the French and Algiers, very tan type people. And in fact, I think Jacques Derrida was also Algerian too. And it's like just the complexion. They're just very well fed. They have a lot of days in the sun. But that's not to say there's not like an intellectual side to them either. But I mean, it's like I don't think many people were necessarily, a lot of the French people that I've seen were necessarily activists, like national and kind of. I mean, nationalism is a heavy word, but I don't think Camus would be. He seemed more of a humanist, if anything. So anyway, yeah, and that's probably where he divided, had kind of a. Not much of a falling out, I don't think, not to make it sound more dramatic than it was. I mean, I'm sure they were probably friends in the classic sense of the term, with Sartre, but that definitely was their difference, I think, with, I think, Camus wanted to disassociate kind of himself from existentialism, and then he kind of coined his own thing, the absurd, I guess, absurdism, I believe. Not sure how much that correlates or how much that ties into the theater of the absurd. Also a post-war kind of thing with Beckett or like waiting for Godot, a lot of nonsensical kind of things going on. And yeah, but I think the main thing with this is that that I like is that the city starts out as very indifferent. Even before the plague hits, they're just very lax, and they just live day to day, and it's as if they don't have anything to live for. Really, it's just like they kind of act as if everything is at face value, just like live, eat, go to work, and die, pretty much. And not too much like on The Stranger, where he's kind of living this life that's very almost like aimless. But at least The Stranger, at least he was, Marceau was aware of that. Like, he was cognizant of the fact that he was living a like a directionless life, and he was and there's a lot of like a passionate kind of writhing against that and rebelling against that. But with the citizens of Iran, they're just not much of them that really care all that much. They're just like waiting to die, pretty much. And one day there's bunches of rats that start to like crawl out of the sewer. And right off the bat, I couldn't help it. I think it's been I want to say 5 years since I've read this almost. And I couldn't help but laugh. I think for the first time I heard that it was rats that are, causing this plague, because it's just something funny yet a little bit morbid, repulsive yet just a little bit humorous in a again, an absurd type of way of rats. Kind of reminding me a bit of Kafka a little bit. Just that kind of animal kind of primal, I guess, primitiveness, I guess, of rats, almost remind me of a bubonic plague. And it's just the fact that all of them start dying, and they go into the street and they just start dying. And one, obviously there's people are concerned about this right off the bat. I mean, it's they're careless town, but it doesn't mean that there's not at least some people who care a little bit. And one of those such people is Dr. Bernard Roux, I think. Roux? I'm not going to try to spell it, but it's Reiux, or something like that. So yeah, I'm going to assume it's something like Roux, something, and I'm just butchering the name, which I probably am. But yeah, he sees this, what's up, and he's, he's a medical doctor he's licensed. He's about 35, I think. And, he's very earnest. He's very, throughout this, he carries a tale, and almost literally, in the sense that he's the only one that, he's not, he might not be a magnet, he might not be a super charismatic guy that's just but he's just he does his job every day. He just shows up, he does what's asked of him, he does what's, he has the, very much a Hippocratic oath kind of thing, where it's I'm not going to try to put my own personal feelings and just try to inject the way I feel about this, but I'm definitely going to try to my best. His way of showing love is a duty kind of way, showing up, doing things, healing people, helping sick people. That's his thing. And he sees definitely a question posed: what's happening with the rats? It's an epidemic. Well, it's more than epidemic. It's different species. It's this weird panspermia kind of. I don't know. It's almost coming from a different world, almost kind of seeding this weird, bizarre organism, this virus that's just festering around, waiting to just hijack people and take them over. And he sees that, and he's starts taking precautions, and he's okay, well, now people have to get tested, because people have been touching these rats. They've been kind of remind me of Flight of the Conchords, quit touching that monkey. But anyway, what's wrong with the world today? But yeah, it's he's concerned, obviously, Dr. Bernard Roux, because he knows that people in Iran probably aren't going to really care, and he's right. They start right off the bat. Everybody's just not everybody, but the mass majority of people are just this is just going to be it's going to hold over. It's going to go away. It's just going to culminate into maybe at best a few people are going to get sick, but they're going to come on. It's not going to be that bad. Come on, which is so something I've seen so many times people do, myself included. Not immune for this, but this human, inclination to just write off something as just, oh, it's like, it's like optimism bias is like a kind of really simple reductive way of putting it almost, but it's even more than that. I think we're hopelessly optimistic, but it's rooted in something that's like not existent at all, because it's the way we're optimistic is that we have no reason to be, and I'm not saying everybody shouldn't be, or that we, it's like, oh, we start doing, questionable things, and we're not, when we have biases like this or whatever. But I think it truly is a deep-seated kind of, not like bad wiring, not anything like that. It's not like we're wrong, but it's just like a part of us that's like continuously, it's like to see our purview, and it's like our, there's different effects. It's not like a Fourier effect, but it's like this thing where we try to see the best in things, but it's coming from like a naivete, it's coming from it's not rooted in anything, because it's like, you could just as well, the fact is like, it's like, like it could be, the world is just literally ending and on fire, and you could just be like, well, it's not going to hurt me, surely. But it's like, no, statistics, they're not to say everything is statistic, but like the evidence, the empirical data is in, everything is just like blinding you in the face. And it's like, nope, no big a deal. So that's what the citizens of Voron are doing. They're just going back to their daily day. Kind of reminds me of what happened with COVID too. Like, people just like, it's not a great deal. I'm not saying like, I mean, it's definitely like a really, really, I don't want to get too political, because I don't really, for one, I don't know. I might have mentioned this before, but I don't know anything about politics, because it's constantly changing sphere. It's always new information every single second. So I try to keep, a firm kind of thing where it's like, if I say anything about politics, I just want you to know that it could be, my viewpoint can change tomorrow when new information comes in. It's like, what's happening with Israel and the Hamas and the Gaza Strip. Oops. Excuse that. I just wrote my phone. It's not really that important to pick it up unless I might need it. Anyway, so yeah, it's this thing that people do, and Dr. Rose sees this, and he's telling people to be cautionary, to think, to be prudent, not to go get an interaction with people. So he starts like lining up. Everybody starts, the city puts in an official government kind of thing, like the city, the mayor of the city, who I forget his name, but he's a, I don't think he's like, like a bad guy either. Like, he's trying to do his job too, but it's just that I'm not sure if he takes it as seriously as the doctor, but he does try to like put strictures on what people do. Like, you can't leave, willy-nilly, and you have to put like, like you have to put, not sure what the kind of the legal term is, but it's like he had to put, limits on what people do, so they won't just leave the city, exile. And there's a lot of things that happen because of this, and that there's one other character, there's Cotard, I think his name is, and he's I think he's like a civil servant, or he's like he's not in there for business, because he's actually quite well off, and he doesn't really reveal a lot about himself. And some people might say that's because he has a dark past, that he's hiding skeletons in his closet, or something. But I don't know if it's quite that. I think it's just because he's, in a strange way, he thinks of a plague as because it gives him an opportunity to help people out, and he starts like actually adding, a lot of pretty good advice too. Like, he's like, like, I think we should start testing people, in such a way. I forget what his proposition was, but he was like, it turned him into a better guy, I think. And like, whatever it was that he's hiding, it's like, it might be, he might have done something ugly for all we know, but it's like, it kind of reminded me of like the Shawshank Redemption, as silly as an example it sounds, but I think that movie, like this idea that punishment comes out of nowhere, and you're like thrown in jail, and it's like, but you're holding, you're making the best of your situation, and you're not like trying to blame it on anybody else or just be bitter. You're just like, well, I'm just going to do the best I can, like Andy Dufresne or the other prisoners, and they just try doing the best with what they got, which is really limited in existential sense. and redefining those values too. Like now their values of like helping the community around them. This is what guitar does. I think it's like it's weird because suddenly some of the people that didn't have any direction in life all of a sudden find something. They're like, I found a weird thing, which is why it's commonly The Plague is called an existentialist novel, because people have a reassessment of all their priorities. They take inventory, I suppose, of everything that's around them, and they think of things differently, and they value people around them differently, more so. So it's a weird thing where that happens. Where same thing with COVID. To try another parallel, no wonder this book was so famous then, a few years back. But yeah, but it's the same thing with that, where people brought out the best in them, or reels of people. I'm not being ironic about this at all. I think it's quite beautiful, but the idea that people have been helping each other more out during the pandemic, even like the worst parts, just making sure people had food, or visited and comforted in their time of need, especially the elderly, who as we all know, had it worse. But yeah, it's that kind of mentality has changed. And there's also another character, I don't know, his name is like Turo, I think, or it's there's the before I forget him, the character is just Father Panelo, I think. He is quite a character. Kind of funny, but in an inadvertent way, obviously. He is a Jesuit priest, I believe, and he's well respected among his circle of like religious people. And he takes it like very seriously. Like he thinks like the plague is it's a arbinger, it's a punishment, like it's God raining down his wrath upon his people, like he's saying that like it's all your fault because you're sinners and you're this and that, and then obviously everybody else, anybody else with half or like the ability to reason or critique to any extent, like just like right away, or just like pointing out the fallacies in that, like the fact that Father Panelo, like God, like why would God all of a sudden choose now? Like why is God is he partial to certain things, and like why would God show wrath on this moment and for this little thing? It's like, is it like a if you go into theology, is it like what's it called, like presuppositionalism, but it's like dispensationalism, I think, like where it's like, does God like go and like does he treat people differently during each era? And that's why Father Panelo, like, is it like, it's hard to exactly describe what he's getting at, because he's so irate and he's very angry, and reminds me kind of like the religious right, actually, to a light example maybe, because at least people like maybe, at least back then people could just be like maybe distance themselves from him. I'm not sure, like they didn't have to go to a church, I don't think, but but today it's like kind of like it's almost like you can't escape that voice of like kind of like just like the fire and brimstone kind of thing, just you're all gonna die, you're all and he has he does show that a little bit of like fealty, or not fealty, but the tenderness, like he says that the God, he loves you, he's if you repent now, he'll he won't turn his back on his own children. He made a pact with with us. He made he loves you, each and every one. So kind of again, like a strange medley of things to say to young dying children of the plague, and just like, it's your fault. And ironically, he actually dies from the plague too, so it's like and yeah, but yeah, everybody else was pointing out kind of the fallacy and the hypocrisy in Father Panelo. So, but it's interesting because this book Camus doesn't seem to be pointing out like a picture, which is why I love it, of like he's pitting people against. He's not writing these characters as like, haha, like this person, I hate these people so much, like this religious person is so hypocritical. But he's also showing atheistic people who have no or who are hypocrites and act out and do things, or it's like I think he's just saying it's almost like the moral dilemma isn't limited to just kind of like what dogma or creed, religion you kind of avow yourself, but it's like we're all kind of responsible for one another in a Dostoevsky kind of sense, where we're all in this together, whether you like it or not, and maybe God doesn't exist in the high, in the grand scheme of trying to reason it out, and as Kierkegaard says, but maybe that doesn't mean we can't do our best to help each other, and I think that's like a bit what Camus is trying to go through, not to put words in his mouth, but yeah, I think he's, but where I was going for that. So yeah, there's another character for the panel. There's this, and so the plague also. One other character who kind of has a rough pass as well, who I think also made a living kind of, he's a bit on the younger side, but I think he lived long enough to kind of have to build up some enemies, I think, and he's kind of using the plague in a sense that he's still kind of engaging in illicit things, like he's still running around and selling like watered down beer or something, or or alcohol or something like that, moonshine and stuff like that, but he also it kind of does bring out like a little bit more, like he's trying to figure out what to do with his life, a little bit more, and he's actually sadly, I think at the end of the novel, spoiler alert, he dies. I think that's because he actually goes crazy. I think when the gates of the city are opened back up and the plague is goes into hibernation or whatever, it's like, I think it said that near the end, Dr. Rowe, who actually is revealed to be the narrator, ta-da, plot twist, I thought it was pretty interesting near the end, because I thought it was interesting that the narrative, the way it's written, is pretty dispassionate and like almost told from a doctor's kind of medical professional kind of air, of professionalism. It's just like, not adorning things, not in that sense. Kafka, like I think Camus took a lot of inspiration from Kafka too. Like he enough so that he wrote about him in The Myth of Sisyphus as one of those ideal or kind of archetypal people that took the leap of faith, that didn't take the leap of faith, but kind of like went really, really near them, and kind of, he was like, I recognize the absurdity, but I'm not going to necessarily do what Kafka did, but Kierkegaard did, but anyway, that's for a different day. But I think with this thing with the plague is that it changed people in like some ways, like it actually made people value life more, but there was also, but they had to learn to kind of overcome the struggle together in a holistic, harmonious fashion, but it also kind of brought out like an ugly side in people. But I think it just kind of showed people's true colors in a sense, people that would act selfishly and with their own interest in mind, as opposed to the collective, and I don't say that in like a socialist kind of like, help out your comrade kind of collective. I just mean like in the general, community size way. And yeah, I think it has a good heart. It has a good heart, this book. There's another character too that I also liked, who was, can't remember, it was Granda, I think it was Joseph Granda, I think. And he is an author, or like I think he's middle-aged about, and he's trying to write his masterwork, and he's like, I think he's been working in the city for a while, and he's like trying to get out of that kind of mentality, that kind of mindset of being limited maybe by his surroundings, and he's trying to like write his own novel, but he can never get past the first sentence because he keeps rewriting it, and he's such a perfectionist that he can't ever get that first measly sentence out of him. Spoken like a true perfectionist, like for all of us, myself included too. I mean, the sentences that I do get out when I'm writing, if and when I'm writing, it's conditional. It's very rest on the fact that I have enough staked enough faith in the stuff that I've written to the point where I have confidence that it's not gonna sound horrible reading back, even just like a few days later. So, the stuff, I'm not saying the stuff that I've forced myself to write out of spite, even, but either way, the characters are like archetypes almost, and I've heard people criticize it for being a little bit too sentimental, I think, and which is weird because it's like the stranger is totally not sentimental at all. It's like the opposite in a weird way. But like I think Camus, as he aged, maybe he mellowed out maybe a little bit, and and obviously it's not like Meursault and the stranger was supposed to be like a reflection of Camus even in his youth, but it's also not to say that any of the characters in this, like, there's anything wrong with being a little bit sentimental and a little bit sappy. I mean, I think in the end it was service towards a good purpose, and it's just that the at least what's not written by the Doctor near the end of the novel, when it's revealed, but what's not written by him kind of does, or the dialogue, what's playing the dialogic everything, I guess, is taking place, like all the back and forths, like, can sound pretty flowery at times, which is fine. And yeah, they're all kind of like archetypes, like Father Pamela is like the archetype of the priest, like in a Jungian sense almost. Like the archetype of the perfectionist writer, artist, the archetype of the like kind of thief with a heart of gold, maybe, or the criminal with a heart of gold, dark past kind of thing, and all that. The archetype of the undramatic doctor who just kind of shows up, and even though it's boring and dull, and that the truth can be ugly sometimes, it's like like that, you're just telling it as it is, trying to, in people's best in people's for their own well-being, I think. So yeah, I think that's it. I don't think I'm missing. Obviously this is just a general kind of overall analysis of it, kind of just me tackling like the themes of it, but yeah, I definitely recommend Camus, and I would love to do more of his stuff, like The Fall, and I think it's called The Last Man, and yeah, I'd love to sometime down the road review those too. So thanks for watching.